So, welcome back to the California Liberty Project. Once again, thank you all for joining us. Thank you for being back with us. As I mentioned last week, we had a bit of a summer hiatus due to some travel, due to me taking some much needed time off. Really appreciate everyone joining me again this week. We've got a great guest here in a second that I'm going to introduce. In the meantime, make sure to be following the show so we continue growing. Follow us on Instagram at California Liberty Project. Follow us on X. Still not very active there. Still need to grow there. Put in some time, I guess. At X, we are at CA_Liberty_PROJ. And then I also have my own personal Twitter or X. That's at Gregory S. Gordon. But our guest today that we are joined by is David Tangipa. And David is running for assembly. So he's a very busy man, very glad to have some of his time today. He is running for California's 8th Assembly District. And there is so much going on in this state. There's so much insanity. There's a lot happening in the Valley. How does the Valley interact with Sacramento and coastal legislators? All this stuff that makes national news. We've got a lot to talk about. But before we do that, I just want to say welcome. Thank you for your time, David, and thanks for being on the show.
Well, thank you for letting me join you. And I don't know if you ever really get a vacation when it comes to, liberating California on a lot of the issues that we see. So thank you for doing what you do as well, and just trying to get the message out, because that's one of the biggest things that I let people know is knowing is actually 50% of what needs to be done. Showing up's really the other 50%, mainly because most people don't know what's coming out of Sacramento, and most people don't show up either. And so if we could do those two things, that's really how we will liberate California on a lot of just these crazy things. And so, but thank you for having me on again. I know I am running for State Assembly District 8, so that includes Fresno County, Madera County, Mariposa, Tuolumne, Calaveras, Mono, and Inyo County. So it borders the entrance into Las Vegas if you're leaving California, but it goes all the way up to the Calaveras-Amador border and is roughly the size of North Carolina. So it is a very big district, and as people can see, I am shooting this video out of my car because I have put 56,000 miles on my truck since I have started this campaign about a year and a month ago. So It's been a long year on my end, just working and showing up, because I think it's very important. Just a little bit about me too. So I was actually born and raised in the Valley. I grew up right across the street from McClellan Air Force Base. And so, and a lot of people kind of remember, they think about Atwater or Castle Air Force Base, Alameda in the Bay Area, Mather again in Sacramento and in the Valley. And it's actually what kicked off my political aspirations, not political aspirations, but more of my policy interests. Because I remember back in the late 90s that the military budget was reduced by $200 billion, where they shut down McClellan, Mather, Alameda, Castle, and all these areas. And my dad's an old military guy. He was in the Navy for a long time. And my mother is from the island of Tonga. So if you always think about those Navy guys, find those island girls. Well, I'm a product of one of those. So
very good.
But I remember asking my father, well, what happened to all my friends, and why is everything boarded up when they shut down McClellan? And he said, well, that's what happens when people are making policy and they don't care about you. And ever since then, I've always been obsessed with presidents and policy, because I do believe that policy is what can change people's lives, whether it's for the better or for the worse. And as we can see, California is a testament to that our lives have gotten significantly harder because of policy. And a lot of people don't realize that, because it was never intended for government to be as big as what it is today. And so since then, I've been working a lot. I grew up in North Highlands, which was destroyed after that military base was shut down. And there's only a few ways you really get out of North Highlands. And for most people there, you're either rapping, you're selling drugs, or you're playing sports. And I took the athletic route, and I got a chance to go play football at Fresno State. I quickly realized I was not an NFL guy. The NFL guys were 17 years old and benching 500 pounds or running 4 threes or doing all of this. And I looked at them and I'm like, I'm going to go get my degree. So I really focus. If they're taking my knees, I'm taking their degrees. And
Right.
so that's where I doubled down on education, utilizing the priority registration that a lot of athletes get. And I got my degree in political science, criminology, a legal studies certificate. I graduated early and I started my master's in business, where I really learned real estate was one of the easiest ways to break generational poverty. So I helped my own family break generational poverty and started a program where I was focusing on first-time home buyers and veterans, just to break that cycle of being generational renters to being landowners and homeowners. So I've done that. I've helped over 60 of my friends and family become homeowners in that regards, focusing on disadvantaged communities like North Highlands that were devastated by policy, like Central Valley and Fresno, Tulare, all the way up to places that just as far as Redding and all the way as south as La Mesa near San Diego. So I've been working in this area. I've done almost $20 million in sales of just
Wow.
trying to get people to break that cycle. But now that we look at today's day and age, and why I've decided to run is, I mean, we look at Sacramento and we look at California. We're the fifth largest economy in the world, and yet we have rolling blackouts. The average home price today in California is $900,000. In the Central Valley right now, just if I look at Fresno County, you need an income of $105,000 to qualify for the average home in the Central Valley. Well, how many people make $105,000? And if I think about my demographic and those same individuals that I was able to help a couple of years ago get into homes, they would not be qualified to buy today because the average Californian cannot buy today.
Right.
15%, only 15% of California can afford to buy the average home right now. And I look at my generation, and that's the millennials and Gen Z and that group right now. How can they afford the American dream of just owning a home and being able to take care of their own family and doing what they want and having dinner and going on vacation and doing these things? I've lived the American dream where I've been able to sponsor my own mother's immigration and where she can say, I'm an American citizen. And it's because of her dedication that I have this deep love and loyalty, because I remember when we were in the food lines, and she would always tell us that you may be the poorest Americans, but you're the richest Tongans because you're an American. She drilled that into us, that there's no such thing as food lines in Tonga. They'll throw your ass in the ocean and they'll say, go and find it. But
Right.
here in America, we could walk down to the corner where our church is and they can give us a box of food and take care of us, or they could sponsor us and all of these different things. So I have this deep love for this area because I've lived the American dream, but we are all going through the California nightmare, and I want to fight for this place. And I've got a lot of people supporting me in this one. Jim Patterson's termed out. He's endorsed me to replace him. I've got Senator Shannon Grove, who's fighting the good fight. And these policies aren't coming from the local government. They're coming from the state. So I want to go
Right.
and shake some things up there in Sacramento and do some things differently.
Yeah, that all sounds great to me. I'm another Valley guy. I'm just south of you, down here in Bakersfield,
Yeah.
and we've got some relatively sane legislators for sure. But as you mentioned, I like this theme that in the Valley, in California's Great Valley, the Central Valley, which is Sacramento basin up in the north, down to the San Joaquin in the south, it encompasses, as you know very well with your truck, hundreds and hundreds of miles, right? And people don't realize that diversity of California. And I'm always talking about it on this podcast here. But it's so sad and it's so tragic what has happened to the interior of California, because this is a land, again, you know this all too well, but for all the folks listening, this is a land that's blessed with rich soil, long growing season, great agriculture, oil and gas, oil and natural gas, natural resources. It goes on and on and on. We have abundance, but we live in more and more so in squalor, right? And we're being targeted by Sacramento. And I'm glad that there's someone in the Valley that's realizing that and taking a stand and saying, no, 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 we know what you're doing. This is not necessary. And it sounds like that fight is in you, from your bloodline, from your heritage, and from where you grew up in, you said North Highlands?
I grew up in North Highlands. Yep.
And
And
is
so
that is that near Sacramento, or I don't know exactly where North Highlands is?
it's Sacramento County. So it's just the
Got you.
northern portion. I mean, I
Okay.
lived across the street from the city limits of Sacramento.
Okay.
So, I mean, essentially, if you're familiar with the Fresno area, it would just be like if you're going to Auberry.
Mm,
It's right in just right on the outskirts of the city limits of Clovis. Just as close as Fresno is to Sanger, or Fresno is to
got you.
Kerman. It's actually a lot closer than that because the city limits actually touch it in Sacramento, but it's just Sacramento County. So greater
Okay.
Sacramento County, right on that line. But you're 100% right. I love bragging about the Central Valley. One, because it's actually a stat that I keep talking about. You know, they look at and this is just from an agricultural point of view. Georgia calls itself the peach state, but there are more peaches grown and sold and in production in Fresno County than the entire state of Georgia. And
Wow.
so over 8 times, if you just look at the 2022 statistics, over 8 times as many peaches are produced and, boxed and housed in Fresno County alone than the entire state of Georgia. It also, Fresno County does more oranges than the entire state of Florida.
Yeah.
So, we look at all Florida's the orange state and Georgia's the peach state. Well, our county in the Central Valley actually does more. And if we include Kern, Tulare, and Fresno County, that's an agricultural value of over $20 billion, which is
Yes.
larger than the entire value of Ukraine was to Europe, of just ag
Right.
value. And yet, I mean, it just baffles me that individuals will argue that Ukraine is a national asset and is extremely valuable to the entire country of Europe. And yet we degrade our own value here in the Central Valley where, I mean, I've told, look, those people who are in LA and the Bay Area and everywhere else, they have the luxury to perform and work in white collar jobs because of the blue collar workers here who put food on their tables, and doing these things that give them that ability. Because right now, I mean, and this has been a huge shift within just the last 100 years. Before, everybody had to grow a garden and do these different things and everything else. But right now, the Central Valley takes care of them. That gives them the opportunity to be the lawyers and the tech services and everything else that they want to be. And so we should brag about our community. I love it here. First off, I'm a Bulldog too. So
Yes.
I
Right.
brag about Fresno State, and I know Bakersfield's got a pretty soft spot for the Cars and the Carr family. And actually, I'll be watching the game tomorrow when they kick off against Michigan with David Carr.
Awesome. Oh yeah. Still, I think a couple of them still live around these parts, and maybe even are involved in coaching and whatnot. But
Oh yeah, they
yeah.
are.
So
Well,
getting
Darren
back
Carr is
to
a coach of Bakersfield Christian, so
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Getting back to some of what makes the valley unique. Again, touching off just what you were saying there, all the different crops that can be grown here, very unique. Even almonds to olives to, you mentioned citrus, even cotton. I mean, all of this stuff. Once again, this is not an agricultural show, but it is a huge part of our valley's economic system and what we have that's special, that's unique, and that would allow us to thrive. Now, we kind of touched on this as well. With bad policy and with horrific regulation, legislation, the whole bit, it makes it very difficult for our farmers and our ranchers to take advantage of the abundance that is here, that naturally, God's abundance here. And it's like an artificial force that we're fighting against just to thrive, to do our best here, to produce all this wonderful agriculture and even the oil and gas. So in Sacramento, what do you think as a legislator, not a miracle worker, but just as a working legislator, what can you do to help open things up, make us freer, allow our industries to thrive, particularly agriculture, water rights?
Here's a perfect example of where and it's what I call they're California policies of scarcity, but there's also congressional policies of scarcity as well that has caused an additional burden on just people trying to grow food. You give them water, they'll do more with it. You take away water, they can't do anything without it. And I mean, it's just as easy as that. And the individual actually running against me in this race is a former congressman. His name is George Radonovich. Well, back in 2006, George Radonovich wrote a bill with Dianne Feinstein and Nancy Pelosi to take 250,000 acre feet of water away from the Bryant-Kern Canal and allocate it towards river salmon.
Yeah.
The river salmon that they expected to come back. So that is 250,000 acre a year out of Bryant-Kern Canal that the Congress passed, and George Radonovich wrote the bill to take that away from farmers to artificially try to bring back these river salmon. Well, I'll tell you this right now, there is no statistical data right now that it has led at all to any recharge on that salmon. Any of it, and yet we're spending billions of dollars, and that bill specifically has fallowed thousands and thousands and thousands of acres. here in the Central Valley that could be in use today, but it is not because of California policies and congressional policies. And now that same individual is running to solve the issue that he created. You can't fight for farmers when you took water away from them, and you can't just say these words. And working with Dianne Feinstein on that bill to be a co-author specifically took water away from farmers. And the valley is feeling those repercussions, because if we had that same value here today, there's no food scarcity issue. There's no any of these other things. There's not a water scarcity issue as well. It's a management issue. And it's a management when individuals like that create this policy called unimpaired flows. And now, because that was started in 2006, a lot of what I get, especially being a Republican, is now when we're arguing about these water policies and these different things, the other side says, well, your guy wrote it, because he is also a Republican too. You can't blame us on the water policies and scarcity. Your guy wrote the bill. Well, they're right. And we can't allow this ideology behind it, because even when that was going in a study that was done by UCLA environmentalists, I don't think they're the ones who agree on most of the policies that I think about, actually said that if this policy, that San Joaquin River settlement, goes through, that the entire west side will have a zero allocation from the federal government if they just had a drought similar to 1991 drought standards, and then we had 5 to 6 years of that drought where the entire west side was given zero, and a zero allocation, where we've now fallowed land. So what we want to do in Sacramento, and what I want to do in working with our federal individuals as well, is wake them up, because you cannot tell me that Ukraine is a national asset and a national security threat if we don't protect them, and yet we're not doing the same thing here in the Central Valley that has a value higher than the entire country of Ukraine. That we feed the world out of this Central Valley so they can eat their own words when it comes to that, because we don't have a water scarcity issue. We don't have a food scarcity issue. We have a policy scarcity issue and a management issue from individuals before that have said that they could do something better. But I'm sorry, if experience of the past is what's gotten us here today, we need to do something different. And we need some policies that actually speak about creating abundance again and just unshackling California regulations.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I love to hear you mention, Ukraine, whatever one thinks about that war, or fighting for democracy in a faraway land, or sending funds even to Israel, or whatever it is. There are funds that need to be freed up here. Or at the very least, Washington needs to back off, as you hinted at. We have federal regulators, we have federal legislation that is completely unconstitutional. I mean, you can read the Constitution in a half an hour. There's nothing in there that says the feds have any jurisdiction over water, over farming, over land usage in any of the states. I mean, there's eminent domain. That's about it. That's in the Constitution. All of this stuff was denied to the feds. And I would love to actually see some legislators getting into Sacramento who are going to kind of take it to the feds and say, no, states' rights. We have the 10th Amendment. We have to protect our valley. We've got to protect our state. These laws that you're writing are unconstitutional, and they're null and void to us. We're going to protect our state.
Well, the one thing that I do warn about that is that the federal government is not as crazy as the state government here. And so there's some things that I don't know how much I trust the state leadership in California, that they should have all of the ability to do that. Because, I mean, we think about the laws that are being passed today. I just think about Senator Shannon Grove. And I actually spoke to a sheriff's deputy yesterday. Senator Grove passed a bill to make child sex trafficking a felony in California, and yet it wasn't already, and that baffled individuals. How could we not get it on the same level as arson, robbery, and burglary? And yet we struggled just to get that bill passed simply because of this ideology. So I always say this, that if we can't get child sex trafficking right, how can we expect to get water policy right in California? How can we expect to get fire? And that is a big portion of my campaign, is education and exposure, because it's educating people on what's going on. Because when I tell people that in California and in Sacramento, these individuals got up from the California Public Safety Commission on the assembly side and didn't take a stand on child sex trafficking. Well, if you don't take a stand on child sex trafficking, you took a damn stand to me. because I feel that personally, because I have family members of mine that were trafficked when they were 14 years old by other individuals that I knew as well. And yet for some people to say that it doesn't exist and it doesn't happen, it happened in my community in North Highlands. I saw it personally. I've seen it when I used to work at McDonald's on the corner of Watt and Roseville Road, that I had people that I went to high school with, that before they started right there. You can't tell me it doesn't exist, and just because you put blinders on, it doesn't make sense. And when these individuals said that this bill disproportionately hurts black and brown individuals by putting them in prison at a higher rate, well, I spun that back around and I told them, well, this disproportionately saves black and brown victims. Who are you protecting?
Exactly.
Who
Yeah,
are you
that's
protecting?
exactly right.
And we've got to do these things, and we have to wake people up. But that's just an example. How can we trust the legislature or the leadership in this state when they can't even get child sex trafficking right? That Shannon is now having issues right now passing the second portion of that bill, which goes after the buying side and the demand side of the market on that type of activity. And when I was speaking to this sheriff's deputy yesterday, he told me that he couldn't go after state law. He had to charge and try to find federal areas where they can go after these child predators, because it was so hard to do it here in California. And not only that, here's another revelation that we're going through today. The finance department in California came out to speak in opposition to Senator Grove's bill, SB 1414, and they said it is too expensive to put pedophiles in prison. That was their argument, that it is too expensive to do it. So I don't trust the state leadership right now to actually give them the 10th Amendment, that all things fall back onto the state. There's some things that need to be reined in on here. And until we get that change in leadership and the mismanagement and the weaponization and call out this weaponization of compassion, we'll probably lean on some federal laws before they get there in this state.
Yeah, I guess my point is, let's get good people in. And Sacramento's a lot closer, and it should be easier to control than Washington, D.C., where they can literally print money to run wars, and they can print money to subsidize abortions for taxpayers and all the other evil that Washington does. Keep the evil closer to home and oppose it closer to home. But going to 1414, I believe, Senator Grove's bill, which, again, it's unbelievable to normal people or folks like you and me and our neighbors in the Valley. It's incredible that there is actually a side that lines up against this. And then they lie and they obfuscate to say, well, here's why. It's going to be, oh, yeah, that's it. It'll be racist against people who are engaged in these activities or something of that nature. And I think I'm done with this stuff. I think we need to name names. If Scott Wiener or whoever these other folks are, if they want to actually oppose something like this, we need to name names and say, this is what's going on. And if you don't want to be called, or you don't want to be insinuated that you're a groomer, if you don't like the name calling, then just say, we're going to protect victims of human and sex trafficking. It's not difficult. So they need to be named, because it's absolutely absurd. They're not even fighting this on some libertarian principle like the rights of the accused. They're literally just lying to obfuscate for sex trafficking of minors. And we know what it's about. And we're all sick of it, right?
And it's where I look at it. And I think about Coach Tedford, and he's the head coach for Fresno State. And he would always say, control the controllables. And it's one of the things that I just have to look internally. How, on my side of the aisle and the things that I'm working on, how are we not doing a better job at highlighting that issue? How are we not showing to the general population that we're not fighting a battle of whether or not, it's Republican values or Democratic values? We're just talking about human beings. And in the state of California today, there's been one party rule since 1998. Truly, that was the last time that Pete Wilson and the Assembly were held by the Republican. So 1998, beyond then, that's over almost 30 years of one-party rule in this state. And yet we, on my side of the aisle, can't inform the general voters, because California voters are getting everything that they wanted because they voted for it. That is exactly right. And that is what the intention of the founding fathers wanted. But yet we're not able to deliver a message that says this group is protecting pedophiles and we can manage the state better. We can end rolling blackouts. We can solve the scarcity crisis that we're going through, whether it's housing scarcity, whether it's water scarcity, whether it's food scarcity, whether it's energy scarcity. And we can manage it better because for 30 years, you guys have had an example of one party rule. And if we can do that as a message just to Californians and tell them that we can manage this state significantly better, that's on us if we can't do it. That's on us telling us that we don't have either a game plan or a strategy to get the message out and saying that these people are protecting pedophiles and I want to keep your damn lights on. I want to lower the cost of living. I want fire insurance to be reasonable for those who live in the mountain communities. I don't want food here in California to be more expensive than the rest of the nation. We shouldn't have higher gas prices. If we're the highest tax in this nation, we shouldn't have some of the worst road conditions right now. I mean, I'm looking at this road in front of me today, and it's filled with a bunch of potholes and these different things. And where the hell is all of our benefits as Californians? And why the hell are we giving $150,000 down payment to people who never even lived in the state from the beginning when we can't even take care of those same black and brown victims and communities first? If we can't do that, that's Republicans' fault, because I am a Republican and I look internally on that one. And if I can deliver a message better for that, then we can start changing some things.
Well, I absolutely agree. The rhetorical, it's not even a flourish, but the rhetorical strategy, or maybe it's actually more of a tactic, has got to be, yeah, you people have now a super majority. Democrats do, obviously. And they've, as you noted, it's been over 20 years. We're pushing 30 years of just a flat out majority. But the super majority has been for more than 10 years. I forget when it actually took effect.
I think it was 2012.
2012, yes. Okay, so 12 years of the super majority, which means that everyone on the right side of the aisle, everyone who's a non-Democrat needs to basically say, you guys own it. Dear voters, dear independent voters, dear folks up and down the Central Valley, all of the crime, all of the high gas prices, all of the regulation, everything you can't do, you can't afford a house, the money going to illegal immigrants for this, that, and the other, every failure of state government, they own completely. And I don't know why more Republicans, and it sounds like you're on this, but why don't more Republicans just hammer that point home that Democrats own the failure? I don't get it.
Well, and I mean, I specifically got my master's in marketing to realize that we have a messaging issue in the Republican Party. And it's a messaging issue on that same front of we're taking on all these different things. And it's really what I look at when it comes to the ideology behind Republicans and Democrats. And not only that, conservative ideology versus liberal ideology. Conservative ideology is actually based on the principles of individualism. Well, that is why it is very hard to get everybody on the same page, because we're all a bunch of individuals and we respect people's independent thoughts and their own individualism. On the other side, it's actually collectivism. They have a collective ideology behind it. Now it's weaponized with compassion. And so even though they could be a bunch of lemmings, all lemmings fall off a cliff together. And they're willing to go off of that same ideology regardless of whether it hurts, doesn't, or helps, simply because the ideology is based off of that collective thought on being a nice person and all of this. And the Democrats have done such a good job at making Republicans synonymous with racist on all of these different things that now it's just created an ideology of now the general person, the average person in California and in America today, they just want to go to work, go home, drink a beer, hang out with their family. They consume an average of 4 minutes of politics a week. 4 minutes a week, and they just want to be left alone. That is what everybody kind of wants. And yet they don't see these things because we haven't done a good job at messaging to these individuals, saying like, hey, there's only one issue that really pulls at 99%, and that's child sex trafficking. And we're fighting against that, and the opposition on that is protecting it. The finance department is coming out. Everybody should know these things. And yet I'm working on modernizing the Republican Party and doing those things because I just think it's crazy. I mean, I tell people this all the time. I was like, wow, the founding fathers and these individuals, kind of started kicking things off for the United States when there was a 2% tax on an English breakfast drink. And yet we're not even pissed off when it comes to kids being trafficked on the streets of California. where are our rallies when it comes to Sacramento? And when the hell for farmers too, when the hell did the French get more balls than Central Valley farmers? Because when they started getting all these carbon emissions and regulated out the ass that they couldn't even continue their day-to-day operations, the French got together and started spraying some manure onto the Capitol building and doing these different things that were necessary
Sure.
to get where we're
Right.
at today. And as a data point, even on that part, look, regulation killed the cotton industry here in California, and cotton used to be king. That was a saying for a long time. In 2006, there were over 200 cotton ginners in California and in the Central Valley. Today, we have 12.
Mm.
That is
Yeah.
where we're at today because of policies and because of the weaponization of policies guided on their messaging platform of weaponizing compassion. And I'm here to wake that up because they can't use that against me. Again, I'm not anti-immigrant. I come from an immigrant family. I sponsored my mother's immigration. I know what it means, but I'm a Californian. I want to take care of Californians, and you cannot tell me right now that this state has been operating in a function that makes sense for Californians when the average home price is $900,000, when the average
Yeah.
income needed to survive or be above the poverty line is like $98,000 right now. When we're going through all of these different things, and I want to help modernize our side of messaging and to let people know you can't blame me. That's the silver lining on this 20 years of one-party rule and over 12 years of being in the super minority. That's the silver lining, is that if you have all the power, well, you also get all the blame. You can't say it's our fault. And Republicans have not done a good enough job at just saying we can manage the state better, because we haven't managed it at all.
Yeah, that's right. And you mentioned some of the European protests. I know in France that was going on. I believe the Dutch, fighting against basically the blob, the globalist blob, who have decided that they want to have essentially, if not formal one world government, but these homogenized policies which spread their tentacles via the WHO, via the WEF, whatever it is. And it's not conspiratorial, but they do want to have a global consensus. That much is published openly. Even the Canadian truckers, I thought that was a thing of great beauty, fighting back against the tyrant, the soft little effete tyrant, but a tyrant nonetheless, Justin Trudeau. And I think so often with Republicans, especially here in California, it's, oh no, we don't want to do something that's rude. We don't want to get our hands dirty. We don't want to like fling manure maybe at a building, which it's rude. It might be a misdemeanor. I'm not advocating crimes of any sign. But the point is, what's in our American DNA? Is in our American DNA that, oh, we just gently go to King George and say, could you please do this? Could you please do? Or did they actually dress up as Indians and begin throwing tea in the harbor? That's the point. There's got to be a little rebellion. There's got to be a little bit of that FU attitude, a lot of attitude, perhaps. That's more American.
I'm just asking them to get child sex trafficking right. I mean,
let's start there.
I should not be crazy to say that I'm pissed off that we don't think here in California that keeping pedophiles in prison is a good enough thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think that's a very safe place to start.
If that is revolutionary, I mean, tell me where that went to the wayside. I mean, and it's just what I think about. Like, that's insane. Like, we've just gotten so far to the point where it's like, you're telling me right now we're arguing whether kids or not should be on the streets, trafficked and pimped out, and you don't want me to go after somebody who likes to buy kids? That's where we're at?
Yeah.
And that's the thing that's supposed to be like, I'm the crazy one saying that we all should be pissed off on that, because we see it. We see it all over the United States on just that issue. I'm not asking for anything else, but and it's a big thing I've talked about, conservative complacency. We do need to stand up. We all need to stand up. And that's not even a conservative principle. That is a human being principle. And yet that is being weaponized against us.
Yeah, that's right. Let me ask you, who do you see as a very effective legislator here in California, either as a communicator or just writing the nitty-gritty legislation? This is an opportunity maybe to pay a compliment to someone who's been particularly strong or maybe inspirational, although I hate to say inspirational and politician in the same sentence,
So it is inspirational right now, because I do look at like individuals like Senator Shannon Grove, that has been very effective just to move things that even in the state of California, she's able to get things done. I mean, just to live in reality, out of the 80 assembly members only 17 Republicans are there. Out of the 40 senators, only 9 Republicans are there. Well, essentially what that means is that we're a glorified advisory board. So the
Right.
state really just asks us whether they think we like it or not, and they could listen or they could not. But Senator Gove was able to be very effective in just getting that type of legislation passed. Like I said, that SB 14 and SB 1414 right now saw opposition, and yet it got it done. And it passed unanimously when the governor actually forced it to the floor in that sense. And so while we were able to get that done, it's where I look at it as a simple revolution here in California is like when you're in a world full of liars, just telling the truth is a revolution enough. And she's working on being just a truth teller and having these hard conversations. And so I see Senator Grove, I see Jim Patterson, and I see a lot of others that are being very effective and effective in a manner in which is very digestible by the average human being.
Yeah, that's right. Putting forth good legislation and then standing by it and championing that legislation, really important. Shannon Grove is a great example on this very common sense bill to protect children and teens. And then I would also say maybe the secondary role is, I think, being a communicator for the cause of freedom, the cause of protecting our individual, rights in our individual communities. And so I think even someone like Bill Asaley right now out of the Riverside area, somewhere down there in the IE, he's done a great job of just being an open communicator, and he's fighting the fight. And I'm seeing that all the time. That kind of mobilizes the troops. Similar to even how Kevin Kiley was going at it a few years ago, especially during COVID times. We had spoken to him. We were involved in some groups fighting for freedom. And he was just a great leader in terms of the messaging and bringing it right to Newsom. And I see that the time is ripe for a lot of younger leaders to get in there and just bring the rhetorical message to fight Newsom's agenda. And Newsom is very exposed right now because he wants to run for president, in 2028. Nobody wants Kamala Harris and Tim Walz to lose more than Newsom. You heard it here, folks. That's the hot take. But Newsom is very exposed. He's planning his 2028 campaign. And I think rhetorically, we can make him the head of, make him Dr. Evil for all I care. But I think we need to pin all this failure on him and his Democrat henchmen in Sacramento.
I just think that for me, resumes matter. You just look at where you've been at and then before and after. Is it better when you became the leader of that area? If we look at San Francisco right now, is it better now than it was before Governor Newsom? Is the state of California better now than it was before? And then I just ask people the question, because that is where somebody's resume is what matters. I just don't think that California gets to be the testament. And even this, when Governor Newsom was saying that California is the example for the rest of the nation, he is 100% right. He is 100% right, because it is the example of what the hell not to do. All the way through and through, and just telling people that it's like, hey, we've just got some issues here, but California can lead the way. It's the greatest asset in the world. We have the largest Mediterranean climate in the world. We have all of the oil and natural resources that we're able to do. We can have large-scale hydroelectrical facilities produce enough of the power if they want to meet all these green regulations, however they want to interpret it in their own minds. I even went to UC Berkeley, and I actually did a panel where I was invited to come and speak on behalf, and they were talking about carbon emissions in the air, and I was there to talk about proper forest management. And I brought up, using their data and their statistics, that California fires that are happening here today, the Creek Fire, the Dixie Fire, and the Lightning Fire, all from 2021 and 2020, put more carbon emissions in the air than 20 years of California mitigation policies. And yet, if their big thing is reducing carbon emissions and mine is proper forest management, we're just the right and left hand of the same body, where I'm telling you the solution. And if the UC Berkeley Blodgett Forest Project says right now that an unhealthy Sierra is somewhere around 800 to 1,000 trees per acre, and a healthy Sierra is in between 20 and 200 trees per acre, Well, then right now, the proper solution to that is removing the dead trees. And if we need to reallocate, and I'll negotiate and talk to anybody, I don't care if you're a Republican, Democrat, or independent. I care if you're weaponizing the system and the process behind it and utilizing it for specific goals that don't make sense or that hurt those who are most disadvantaged in these areas. And if their policy in their study is telling me that that is a healthy forest and we can reallocate that material to building more housing, because housing right now, there's no housing crisis. There's a housing availability crisis because the government has made it so damn hard to just build. If you build more, you solve the supply issue, because that's what it is. You can't put more people and give these subsidies to allow people who are not California citizens and not Americans, and you allow them the opportunity to buy. Now all you've done is add additional buyers to an already choked supply market created through regulation and red tape and different things. That if we need to allocate that same material in the dead forest towards affordable housing simply by increasing the supply, because you can't have affordable housing without affordable material first. You shouldn't be trucking it in from Montana, Alaska, Canada, and Arizona. We could reduce vehicle miles traveled if that's what they want. They just need to get out of their own way and pull their minds out of wherever it's at, and just operate in a fashion that makes sense from their own arguments. And I call that political judo. It's using it against them to just say, like, dude, you guys are a bunch of hypocrites. It doesn't even make sense, and you're not even listening to yourself. And you don't have to argue with me on that. You guys argue with UC Berkeley, because that seems where you get all your thought process from anyways.
Well, that's right. And I think a really solid spot for a conservative to argue from, and I'd like to see this more and more, is we are coming from the pro-humanity side of things. We are not anti-salmon or delta smelt or blunt-nosed leopard lizard. I mean, I love nature. We want to care for our home, where we live. All that's fine. That's good. But if Democrats are going to set it up as a head-to-head, one's got to win, one's got to lose, if that is the case, then we have to default to humanity. We've got to default to human beings, even if 12 delta smelt might have to swim around a weir or a levee or whatever.
Well, they just finished that study, and for the 6th year in a row, there are 0 counted delta smelts.
Correct.
So,
yes.
0.
So we have to ask ourselves, when they're pointing to something and it's not even that thing. And I might challenge the welfare of the delta smelt. Again, I don't hate delta smelt, the poor little guys, but I really prefer that human beings can grow crops and can live. But when they point to the delta smelt or the blunt-nosed leopard lizard or whatever it is to stop growth or to stop a project or construction, and then it doesn't turn out to be true, as you just pointed out, well, I think we all need to pull back the curtain and say, what's really going on? Who are these groups? What union is it that might have been gotten to? Or what Center for Biological Diversity out of Arizona? What nefarious group is it? Who is funding it? Why are we stopping a project that could help California humans?
Well, and that's the part where I've called out. It's just like in the state of California today, large-scale hydroelectrical facilities are not considered green and renewable if it produces over 40 megawatts. And a large-scale hydroelectrical facility is just a dam. Like big dams, not considered green. Small dams considered green, simply because they made this arbitrarily mark at 40 megawatts. Anything above 40 megawatts, not considered green. Anything below 40 megawatts, considered green. Doesn't make sense to me. I've even asked them, I was like, when it hits 30, is that when it starts to progressively get brown? Because I'm just trying to understand this part. But then I've just told them too, that if you do not believe that whether it's dams or different things, and when they passed that bill, and this was Governor Gray Davis's last hurrah, was that created the California renewables portfolio. The environmentalists made it to where large-scale hydroelectrical facilities were not included because they did not want to incentivize dam building. Well, okay, then let's negotiate, because this country was built on compromise. Let's make all existing current infrastructure right now included on that. We'd actually meet that green renewables portfolio standard for 50% of our energy in California to be green and renewable, however they want to look at it, by just changing the legislation in words without adding a single carbon emission and without building a single dam, by just getting out of that California policy. And we'd be able to make that mark and end all rolling blackouts in the entire state of California by doing that. And yet they won't. And I called them out too. And I said, you're not an environmentalist. You're an anti-human activist. and you are just working on anti-human policies, because right now our utility bills are so damn high that it's hurting the families that are most disadvantaged. I grew up in low-income housing. Again, my mother's an immigrant from there. I know what $20 means to the average individual, because I've lived when I had $20 left in my account to where I had to choose whether it was paying for gas or paying for food. And if I spent $10 here, well, that means I've got to ride the bus a couple more times because I'd rather eat for a couple more days. So I know what that means. And they're creating these choke chains where it's limiting the supply on whether it's energy, housing, and everywhere else, and it's hurting those who are most disadvantaged in these communities that are trying to just break that mold for it. So I don't allow these individuals to call themselves environmentalists if they're not speaking properly, that even looking at their own data when it comes to proper forest management, when it looks at their own data when it comes to creating and meeting their carbon emissions reduction standards, whatever the hell they're talking about, that they're just full of it. And so they're an anti-human activist. And I'm a conservationalist because I won't call myself an environmentalist, just like Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt was the one who created the National Forest Project and all of these other ones to protect the environment. It was also Richard Nixon that created, which was another Republican, I don't always agree, on the EPA side to protect a lot of our forests. And it was also Ronald Reagan who created CEQA, who wanted to protect the environment, but it has been other individuals that has weaponized it against us.
Yes. Yeah, and I won't even go into Nixon and the EPA and OSHA.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I know.
I get the gist of your point for sure.
Yep.
We only have a couple more minutes. Let me ask you, Newsom, national news, it hits his desk, AB 1840. And for everyone out there, that's this big national news item, of California, nutty California is going to be financing or giving out up to $150,000 for down payments to illegal immigrants in our state. It's now sitting on Newsom's desk. Do you think he's going to sign it? What's going to happen here?
See, if
it's a coin toss, or I don't want to put you on the spot.
If I'm a betting man, I think it's so much in the news right now. There's a chance that he does not sign it, but I'd almost look at it from the point. I mean, and it passed like 42. It barely passed because you need 40 votes, and it was like 42 to a bunch of people just abstained.
Right.
Which. Yeah, I mean, you should just vote no. Vote no, mainly because why? You don't have to make it a racial argument. You don't have to make it any other argument. You could just say that California is in a $72 billion deficit. We don't have any money to give to anybody else.
Sure.
Right. We don't have any money and from a priority standpoint, when our kids, we're removing $500 million from the education here in California, when the average sixth grader reads at a third grade reading level right now in California schools, and we're reallocating those funds to a different area to help people who could just get here next week.
Right.
I mean, that will bankrupt the state of California or take away from our kids when it comes to that. This is a priority issue that we have here. We're not even taking care of Californians. So I do think that there's a lot of public pressure. I mean, it's in the media. And so headlines, you got to think about headlines when it comes to politicians sometimes. And I say that as somebody who's running for office, that if they can create headlines which generate, whether it's negative traffic or different things like that, but I do think it's 50-50. I think it's just 50-50 from a standpoint of there's a lot of people angry, and it's not because of a racial thing or not. It's because of, hey, where are my just desserts? I mean, there's a lot of communities out there right now saying like, whoa. We need better schools. We need better roads. We need better sidewalks. We need better infrastructure. Our water is scarce because we don't have clean water in a lot of up and down the Central Valley. And you're telling me right now you are going to give $150,000 down payment to individuals who are illegal immigrants? Illegal immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. It's insanity. It's insanity on just taking care of Californians first. So I think there's a lot of pressure there, but that pressure will only come if we're able to actually keep informing people on what's happening here in California.
Yeah, that's right. I've kind of gone out on a limb, and I've predicted that Newsom will not sign it because it kind of, and we'll see if I'm right. I'll fully come out and I'll own it if he decides to do a flipperoo and he actually does sign it. I do not think he will sign it because he's so Machiavellian. He has no soul. He has no North Star. I don't even think he's really ideological. I think the guy really I honestly believe he has his sights set on the White House. And I think they leaked this. I think they pushed this national story so it would become almost like a meme that people are repeating. It's very mimetic. And now I think what he can do is kind of jump off the top rope, to use an old pro wrestling analogy or metaphor. He can jump off the top rope on everybody and say, boom, we can't do this. This is crazy. He does that from time to time, as you know. 1 out of every 4 or 5, whatever it is, 1 out of every 10 of these outlandish bills that go through our legislature, Newsom will come in and be the moderate or the voice of reason. And it really helps him for his campaign that he's gearing up for in 2028.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the things that I've talked about, especially with Republicans. You get a little bit of whether it's satisfying the hunger or it's a little taste of something from somebody who's been identified as a Democrat their entire life or have done different things. Well, then Republicans automatically have in their head, well, they must not be that bad already. And it's just that little bit, and yet it's the standard that they don't even hold for Republicans as well when it comes to whether it's somewhat moderate Republicans or just different ones, because they actually do understand. And is what I love that you bring that up on the Machiavellian side of politics. There is a big game that is being played in a lot of different areas, and they understand whether it comes to the things that are necessary and what needs to be done. And then what needs to be pushed out when it comes to a media standpoint. I mean, we're seeing that right now today from the gaslighting of the media on the side of, Kamala Harris is an AG from a border state and she enforced these laws. We were a sanctuary state. No, you didn't.
Right.
Like, we actually said we will break federal law to not inform ICE agents on when they have these individuals for deportation. I mean, we said we will not do that. So that is a direct violation of federal law, and you can't just claim that. And so we're seeing these type of games being played and called out. I mean, I look at it from the same standpoint. Gavin Newsom doesn't pay $16, or he doesn't pay $25 an hour to his employees at his restaurant. The guy takes as many tax write-offs as anybody else when it comes to his own business. I mean, you just got to understand. Nancy Pelosi has a $22 million home in Florida that she plans on retiring to because they don't want to retire in California. I mean, we got to see all of these things and just understand and just get it all out there on the hypocrisy, and just keep on working. It takes things like this to inform people that you got to participate. And that's where we've got to participate. We got to call out conservative complacency, that it is not good enough to just be home right now because it's unfortunate, but the other side, or individuals that have weaponized this power and compassion and different things, are now coming after your kids. They're coming after your school board. They're coming after local jurisdictions. They're coming after planning and general planning that counties want to do in different areas. I mean, Fresno County is being sued by Rob Bonta right now because he didn't sign off on our new industrial park that we're trying to build in this area that can bring hundreds of thousands of jobs, high-paying, high school required jobs here to the Central Valley. And because it didn't sign off on what he wanted to be done, they are now using the centralized state power and weaponizing the AG's office. Why are you here? Why are you here rezoning in Fresno County? That is not what the AG is supposed to do when it comes to actually, hey, why don't you enforce other laws that protect people here? Because we've got a crime issue, we got all these different issues right now, and yet you're taking on rezoning in Fresno County. For local officials should have the power to do so, because I think they know what to do better than the state of California.
Absolutely. It's all about subsidiarity, for sure. Keep power as local as possible and concentric spheres of influence. David, I know you're really busy, and I really appreciate your time. Before I let you go, what are your social media channels, and what do you want people to do if they like what they hear, want to get in touch with your campaign, or even donate, get involved? How do they reach you, and what should they follow on your media?
It's pretty easy. It is only my family in the entire state and in the U.S. that actually has the last name Tangipa. So the easiest way to find me is Tangipa. Tang IPA. I do have a campaign beer that a local brewer brewed for me. If anybody is interested in that as well, they can just go to my website as well, davidtangipa4assembly.com. They could also, anything on social media. If they just look up that last name, they're just going to find me and my brothers. So
Cool.
they'll know which one's me because I'm the lightest and the smallest out of all of them since I'm Polynesian. They're all bigger than me, and I'm kind of a big guy.
So you
But
were a tight end, and they played more on the line. Were they like guards or tackles or whatever?
they should have been, but they were not interested in playing football as much as I was. And so, yeah, I've got a 17-year-old younger brother that's about 6'5" and about he's maybe 270. So he's a pretty big guy. But I got another younger one too that's also about 310 pounds and 6 foot. So I'm smaller than all of them. But yeah, they can find all of my information right there. David Tangipa for Assembly. They can look me up at just Tangipa, Tangipa. I'll show up on my Assembly account on that one. We're talking about these bills because it's all about educating and exposing just what's going on here. Because I always tell people in 20 years, I just want to be a professor at Fresno State. I do the post-game analysis show.
Cool.
So I get to do the radio for Fresno State football. I want to be a high school football coach, coaching wherever my kid goes in high school. And I just don't see that future happening right now because it is getting so hard here in the state of California. I love this place. I had people change my life when it comes to being the first person to graduate from high school, doing the business that I've been able to do, and all these different things. And now it's my turn to go work for them because Sacramento's creating these policies and making it hard on everybody here.
That's absolutely right. I can't argue with that at all. David Tangipa, thank you very much for your time. I hope we can talk again. I know it's going to be busy for you in the next 2 months, I'm expecting, but I'd love to chat with you again. There's so much going on in this state. Yep. Thank you for your time, and drive safely out on those roads, out on the 99, the 5, wherever you are. All the best, and hopefully we'll talk to you again.
Yep. Thank you for having me on.
This has been the California Liberty Project podcast. Make sure to subscribe, share it with others, and follow us on Instagram and Twitter.